Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. It's great to see all of you here, people who are interested in group psychotherapy. I often say that there are two kinds of people. This might be a gross generalization, but there are group people and people who do group. And group people, hopefully all of you here, group people are people who know that group is effective, been trained, you're curious, and people who do group often, unfortunately, in the community, do groups because somebody asked them to do it in their agency. They're often not trained, which is a big problem in group psychotherapy. And they often don't believe that group works. So thank you for being here and having a different view of that. Identifying and facilitating critical moments in group psychotherapy. My talk is going to be a little bit about my own history with group psychotherapy, and then on difficult and awkward situations in group psychotherapy. And if you run groups, you have had probably many of them, so we'll talk about that. I know there's a lot of reading on that, so I'll just kind of briefly summarize it. I've been interested in groups for over 40 years, and I have been really lucky in terms of the training and the mentoring I've had, and it's exciting. But I have wanted to talk just about a few takeaways. Over the years, I've learned to watch and wonder, which has been really helpful in terms of learning about group psychotherapy. And gradually, I've learned about the power of group process and the effectiveness of group psychotherapy. I think if you've done enough groups, I'm so excited to watch the progress and the healing that occurs in group psychotherapy. And I remember when I started, everyone thought people needed to be in both individual and in group, and my argument was that's not really true. I think that there's room for that, but I think that group in and of itself is very, very effective, and I think that group people know that. In the early 1980s, I read everything I could get a hold of on groups. And there wasn't a lot, actually, but I read about theory and cohesion and group leadership development, group supervision of groups, preparing group members, group selection, on and on. Thankfully, I found people who were also excited about group. I joined national organizations, and I hope you will too. And later became a faculty member who teaches group currently and does research on group. I was influenced by the viewpoint that group processes in all types of groups. So not just group psychotherapy, but in this room, in staff meetings, everywhere. And it's hard to not see it now that one is very familiar with looking for it. Unfortunately, one big problem with group psychotherapy is the training is not good in general, and I've worked with a lot of agencies in the community where people have not been trained, or that they have certain belief systems about group. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it's really important as group becomes more and more available in all kinds of agencies, it's practiced everywhere, that we also have good group leaders. And that people really are trained to do that. So I really appreciate American Group Psychotherapy Association and Four Corners, also because training is one of those important pieces that sort of the hallmark of the organization. So thank you for that. Oops, I'm going to go back just for a minute. I got very lucky, as I said, in terms of my history of group psychotherapy. I had my faculty mentor at the University of Pittsburgh was Dr. Mill Seligman, who was a group person. And I also had the benefit of many group psychotherapy mentors. Some of them are listed. Dr. Sally Barlow, some of these names will be familiar to you. Gary Burlingame, Bob Canine, Jerry Corey, Janice DeLucia-Walk, Sam Gladding, Andy Horn, Dennis Kivlin Jr., and Zipporah Sheckman and Rex Stockton and many others. And what I hope today is that if you are early in your group psychotherapy experience, that you find a mentor here. And if you're a mentor, if you can find some mentees, it's really critical in terms of my own development and all of your own development that you have mentors that can be supportive of you. This is McKeesport, Pennsylvania. This is a picture from the 1980s. What you see here are steel mills on both sides of the Monongahela. In the background, you see Pittsburgh. My first groups, these are confessions of a novice group leader. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I worked in a social service agency in McKeesport. That was along the Mon. And at the time, there was a major recession and massive layoffs in U.S. Steel and Westinghouse, the two major employers. The clients' families had worked at U.S. Steel and Westinghouse for generations, and they were devastated by the elimination of jobs. Client concerns increased, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, depression, substance abuse, and hopelessness and others. During this time, I began conducting group psychotherapy for women's sexual abuse as children. I hate to say that I was excited about working with people who had been so devastated, and not excited in a positive way, but that the rest of the people in my agency did not want to work with them. And I thought this was a really good opportunity for me to do groups. Again, although I had no idea what I was doing. Group at the time was considered, and still is actually, the treatment of choice for people who've been sexually abused. What I learned from the members. I listened to their experiences. They stated that how after reporting and treatment, it was more abusive to them than when they revealed the abuse. Because what happened was they had to tell their story over and over and over again to people who were supposed to be helpers, and no one wrote it down or conveyed it to the next person. And treatment of choice at that time was the hot seat, so that they had to tell their story. Can you imagine this before anybody even developed any trust in the group? I learned the power from this experience of humility, curiosity, empathy, and silence. What I learned then, I still believe very firmly today. What is universality? What was most startling to me was that when the women walked in the group, they didn't have to even say anything. There wasn't a word spoken, and they knew everyone else had been sexually abused also. That was universality very powerfully. I learned curiosity. I learned to understand people's very unique experiences and not assume that anyone was similar. They had very, very unique experiences, and I had to really understand deeply how their experience unfolded. I learned humility. I had to appreciate so much their courage, since I have not been sexually abused myself. I also learned that group psychotherapy is a collaboration, so that the goals and what we were doing in group was a co-collaboration between the leaders and the group members. We co-constructed goals, and oftentimes what was startling was the goals were not about sexual abuse. They were what they wanted to talk about, and oftentimes with child sexual abuse, there's a lot of other things that happen to them that they wanted to talk about. I learned the value of good supervision. Supervision in general is often focused on the client. If there's, by the way, if there's supervision at all in groups. So if there is supervision in groups, it's often about the clients, the problems with the clients. Groups, and supervision of groups should be much more than that. It should be about the group leader, if there's co-leaders, about the co-leadership relationship, and about the group process. which unfortunately rarely happens. I also learned how to recommend clients to group. People around me were saying, I can't get any of my clients, or I can't get clients to be in group. And I thought that was really strange, because I had had really good success with that. And what I did was, and this would make good sense to all of you, people are coming to group, or people coming to see someone for their problems, and especially if you think about child sexual abuse, people have really a difficulty with trust. And so it's not a one-shot deal. I would say, this is what I think the next step of your treatment is. I want you to go home and think about it. I want you to think about the questions that you have about group. And I would do that maybe 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before people would agree to be in group. And it was remarkable how many people were willing to join. Yet, one experience that I had that stays with me is that no matter how many times I told the women in the groups that I had a co-leader who was a woman, and that all the people in the group would be women, every single one of them came and assumed I was lying to them, and that there would be men in the group, and that my group co-leader was a male. And so it was really a dawning awareness for me about the trust issues that I needed to really help them with, and how caring I needed to be to help them understand the group is good and can be a very safe and very therapeutic experience. I'm going to switch a little bit now just to awkward moments and not so much about me. I want people to understand that awkward moments and difficult situations are common. Everybody's had them. And so instead of expecting them to not happen, one should expect them to happen, and that they should be assumed not to be a problem. These are some of the gems of discovery, if you want to look at that and say, I'm really curious about what's happening here with these awkward and strange moments. One of the ones that seems to be a really problem for a lot of the people I work with and the students is the long silence. And at first it feels very, very awkward, and people are very anxious about it. And if you notice up there, this is something I actually didn't know until I was doing my slides. It says the word listen contains the same letters as the word silent. In 2012, Dennis Killigan and Brittany Tibbetts did a study that's in group dynamics, looking at the difference between novice group leaders and expert group leaders. And they looked at several variables. One, by the way, was about the use of process, which obviously group leaders, experts used a lot more. But in this particular case, they were looking also at silence. And the novice group leaders thought that silence was bad, and obviously tried to get rid of it. The group leaders who've had a lot of group experience thought that it was an opportunity, and that to try to be curious about what was happening. The title of the research is Silence is Bad. Waiting often is a hard piece to do, but is very important. And I always think that the next thing that happens after a long silence is going to be really impactful. So I want to wait for that. You're sending a message that you are expecting a response, since group participation is an essential feature of effective groups. If you ask a brilliant question, you should probably wait for the answer. You want to be a model on how to allow the thinking, formulating, and the interaction process. You'll need to be patient. Also, communication is a turn-taking. So it's important to set that up, that people really respond to your questions, and that you don't step all over your good questions by moving on too quickly. A long silence is often a perfect time to ask the group, what is happening now? You'll want to lead with curiosity. You want to be wondering too. More about the long silence, since it's such an awkward, difficult moment, also known as the sound of silence. Listen intently to the sound that silence makes in your group. Yalom says silence is never silent. What's happening in the room? Listen to your own heartbeat. Consider questions after a long silence, such as this. What message is your silence sending? What message do you want your silence to send? Your silence is really loud today. There seems to be a lot going on unsaid. What words would you put to your silence? Another point and I understand that these are kind of not all connected, but I do want to mention that all group psychotherapy is diverse. And in fact, we want to embrace that. We want diversity in our group. The diversity of culture, of socioeconomic status, ideas, religion, politics, intersecting identities, gender, make for a rich group experience. And we need to be able to embrace them. I have the privilege of being white, cisgender female from a birth family who is supportive, stable, valued, independence in education, had money for food and other needs and wants, owned a house, had citizenship in the United States, were healthy. My parents lived long lives. My mom died at 91, my father at 97. I also gained additional privilege with several degrees, a faculty position, married, adopted 2 healthy children. Those are not typically the kind of clients that we see, and I think that we really need to get in touch with our own privilege when we're working with clients who have had often very difficult histories. Group leaders, all of you, and group leaders in general, have privilege and power that need to be acknowledged. When working with group members who struggle with difficult areas, like depression and anxiety, interpersonal relationships and trauma, and concerns were also related to community, immigration, social barriers, policies, it's helpful to come from a multicultural orientation. Values humility, and I'm going to say this several times, humility and curiosity are really essential ingredients for a group leader. And being also aware of your biases. The problem with having a diverse group was not a problem, but it also can cause a lot of conflict because people have a really hard time understanding differences. We're all sort of more familiar with people who are like us. Differences are often met with suspicion and disagreements, scapegoating, bullying, and potentially microaggressions. Differences are seen as bad. Hard to understand people who have different views. In diverse groups, they're common. You'll hear comments, and many of you have heard them, whether they're in a group or outside of a group. You speak such good English. You're not like others. Where did you come from? I didn't address it because she was really old. Calling someone she, who goes by they. Some microaggressions are rooted in being unaware, while others are based on rigid views and some people are more worthy than others. Psychologist Daryl Wing Su defined microaggressions as brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. It seems to me that the people who are otherwise well-intentioned and unaware of the potential impact of their words are the very perfect people to be in group psychotherapy. That's what groups can help with: interpersonal sensitivity, understanding each other, and broadening their experiences. I'm going to talk just briefly about what some of the things that you might want to do to help with microaggressions. You really want to have norms that are very clear about differences of opinions and how people respond to each other. So we listen out of curiosity. We don't listen out of trying to change their opinion, which is often an easier place to be, especially if we don't understand. As a starting place, you will want to assume that there maybe naivete is happening and not so much maliciousness, that many people really just don't know. It's a good chance to ask people how they're feeling about what they heard somebody else say, or how they feel about what somebody said to them specifically. It seems like differences in beliefs, culture, sexual orientation, religion, politics are hard to understand, you might say to your group. Remind the group about the norms that you said earlier and of what you expect. But mostly, you also need to be very comfortable with actually helping people address differences, because they certainly will come up in your group. I'm going to just go ahead and go through this sort of quickly, since I talked about this already, but that microaggressions often happen between members. They may happen between you and a member, but they also happen between members. Group leaders need to appreciate those differences. Group leaders will benefit from understanding their own diverse intersectionalities and their own biases, and intentionally convey them to the group members through group norms and messages to the group about positive benefits of diversity. You may want to have group members listen to each other and talk about what makes it so hard to hear and understand differences. It's a good idea to discuss the value of curiosity and humility, which I know I keep saying, with members in the meeting prior to joining the group. What is it, your expectations about the group norms? Another really difficult thing, I think, for many people is verbal attack on the leader. And the aim of an argument or a discussion should not be victory, but progress. You may have heard some of the following. Are you only a student? I want a real doctor. This group is a waste of my time. You're too young, old, whatever, fill in the blank, to understand me. Responding to verbal attacks on the leader is probably a power play, but you need to understand it. Responding to verbal attacks on a leader is fairly common, particularly in groups where there's some intensity. Behavior may be the very reason the person's in group. This helps me a lot. I don't have to like this person or feel like I like their behavior, but if I continue to remember that that's probably why they're in the group in the first place, they don't get along with people well, then I can think about the fact that that's my job. That's what I need to be doing to help this person, and group is a perfect place for that. Some things you don't want to do. You don't want to get in a power struggle with them. As I say regularly, they're way better than you are at it. You don't want to get into it anyway, but basically they're way better than you are. Don't respond with defensiveness, even if you want to, because you're going to want to, right? You're going to, and check your body like reaction to that. You won't want to do that either. You don't want to attack back, obviously. That sounds so easy, but internally, just think about what happens when you get attacked, how you feel, what you want to do, right? Using sarcasm. I think that sarcasm can be biting and mean. And some people can use sarcasm in a helpful way. If you know somebody really well, it's really not appropriate for group. And then, of course, there's not responding at all. You do want to respond. You're the leader. You need to do something. So what is it, the something that you should be doing? Well, you may want to say one of the following process comments. You sound angry at me. Or you all sound angry at me. Which is usually harder to handle, but it happens. Let's talk about it. I'm glad you're telling me you're angry, even though you might not be really glad, but I'm glad you're telling me because you want to open up the conversation. Telling me that you're angry and tell me more about it. I'm wondering if other members feel the same way. So then you can go to your group and say, other people feel this way, and you need to keep a really open posture on this one. I really want to hear what you're saying, yet I wonder if you say it differently. It feels threatening. So a little bit of self-disclosure there about how you're feeling. And thanks for letting me know. Can you tell me more about your feelings? Any of those process comments, and there's many more. You can come up with a ton more of them that would work just as well. I also want to talk about just briefly about the long goodbye. Termination is hard, and especially if your group's been long and intense and intimate, and actually it may be as hard for you as it is for your group members. Okay. There's hardly any research on termination, which is a problem because I call it the neglected stage. You will want to say it well, do it well. There's an article in International Journal of Group Psychotherapy in 2007 that really does a nice job of talking about saying goodbye and saying it well. We do know a little bit about it, so weaker therapeutic relationships actually make it more difficult for people to terminate well. So we all want to develop good therapeutic relationships with our clients because it helps the termination process and outcome, which is obviously the goal. This is one study that is Keynote in 2008 found that agreeableness and openness to experience were strongly associated with successful termination in short-term group psychotherapy for elderly depressed clients. That makes sense. And it makes sense that we want to think about maybe that's characteristics we want to be looking for or hope for or develop in our group members. Openness of experience and agreeableness are nice to have in your group. This picture is a picture of the University of Alabama women's crew team. I happen to just be in Alabama. I happen to be standing on the river, and I happen to be watching the crew team go by. And it made me think about how lovely that was, that this crew team was working together. And it made me think about group psychotherapy. A coxswain is the person who's in charge of the racing shell or a ship's boat and its crew. There's a synchrony to group psychotherapy. Like a racing shell, sometimes the oars move together in a smooth, efficient, forward direction. Other times, members are not moving with the rest of the crew, causing the shell to drag, to stall, to move in a different direction. Group leaders need to be able to help members steer the group forward. It's an exciting, complex, and very, very rewarding role as a group leader. Thank you you very much for listening. I appreciate it. It's a little snippet of what all of you know, and I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much. You have a very good day.